Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. So this idea of the mind and discrimination, how does that work? Mahamati still not getting it. Shakyamuni still trying to get through to us that it isn't that there are good and bad discriminations. It's that the engine, the facility, the mind that discriminates, that function of mind, which is driven by the consciousnesses of wanting to experience, wanting the mechanisms of curiosity, of potential, wanting to validate their manifestations of potential, desire evidence. This is what builds the skandhas. I just saw a video this morning talking about, I didn't read the whole thing or see the whole thing. I just saw the title about the Higgs field being unstable. And I thought, why is this a question? Of course it's unstable. If you understand the word stable to mean stasis, a condition of contained tendencies and conditions, which, if they're contained and stable, really means that the tendencies and conditions have kind of not there anymore. The very nature of tendencies and conditions is that they're in motion, right? It's a momentum. It's not a static thing. So the notion that physicists would be struggling with the boson field is unstable. Well, duh. The boson field is the field of energy which interacts with all other energies to form mass. See, there's this idea that if energy isn't doing something, then it doesn't exist. And this is a myth of science that I've never understood. And when we talk in Buddhism about quiescence, we're not talking about nothing. We are talking about no thing, but potential, that word, it's so ripe, it's so full of, right? So potential, just like quiescent energy, isn't that there's no energy, it's that there's energy at the ready. Energy, you could almost sense a tension, but giving it the word tension is to give it too much form. It's just not manifesting anything yet. It's like it's awaiting what? Work, action, some spark, some interaction. So as soon as there's action, interaction, work, whatever verbiage you want to use, as soon as energy is agitated, perturbed, rubbed up against, whatever science or ideology you want to use for that energy, quiescent, ready, potential, as soon as something applies any kind of a interjection, then that energy, it has tendencies and conditions. And those ripples, just like the waves on an ocean, they'll just quiet back down into the ocean, or they'll amass more energy upon energy, and they'll, by virtue of land masses, the waves will grow and they'll curl and they'll have this release of energy, and right? It's just this action, karma of energy that instantiates, manifests, and releases. This is the mechanism of all phenomena, all of life. Now, the senses, eye consciousness, ear consciousness, smell consciousness, taste, touch consciousness, all of those senses are built upon this stream of karma collecting more and more energy that develops some rudimentary sense of what's happening here. Not that question in particular, but as I'm amassing all of this energy, or the energy is amassing, there comes a point where there's some sort of perception. There's some sort of desire for some rudimentary validation. It's built into just the tendencies and conditions amassing together. I don't want to use the words that... See, language wants to make that consciousness, but it's not consciousness. It's just the process being the process, right? Just like when you rub two sticks together, and at some point there's so much heat developed between those two sticks that you can actually spark a fire. But that's not because the sticks become sentient. It's not because they go, ooh, look, we're making so much heat. How do we validate that we're making all that heat? Let's make fire. No, it's not conscious. It's just part of the process. And as part of the process, the complexity, I mean, we're not two sticks rubbing together. The complexity of a human apparatus, this body, the brain, the nervous system, the blood, all of that is doctors study for years and years, and they specialize in little parts of it, and they still don't know everything. It is extremely complex. So for some aspect of that energy collecting together to create an I consciousness and all the component parts, brain, nerves, blood, photon receptor, and so on and so forth, to make a mechanism that sees, that's capable of seeing, that's incredible. But as incredible as that is, with the unfathomable amount of amalgams of energy that came together for that to instantiate, and its whole purpose to instantiate is to receive photon data and start to qualify everything. That's the root of discriminations. Not the I consciousness, but everything that combined leading to that I consciousness is discriminating. This electron, not that, this electron, those two protons, this neutron, that's all discrimination. It's built into the chemistry, biology, long before the I exists and a brain to catalog those discriminations that it is receiving, and then the emergent mind, the sentient being consciousness that comes emergent from this whole process, to be completely immersed in cataloging and recognizing, and ooh, look, blue, green, yellow, ooh. That whole mechanism, that's what Shakyamuni is talking about. The tremendous amount of energies and momentum that are cataloging, discriminating, make for us this massive database of information that we can hardly consciously sift through, but we use in order to identify self, ego. That whole thing, everything we experience, and it's not just eyes, obviously, it's oral, it's touch, smell, so on. That's the discriminations Shakyamuni is talking about. They're not good or bad. They're just the process. But what's underlying that process, the energy, all the way back to the quiescence, the energy that's been potentialed, if you want to make a word, that has amalgamated from potential into these unfathomable, incalculable amalgamations of energy to come to this mind, this person, this world, this universe. Incalculable. Stop trying to count it, right? Dust particles, Ganges, world systems, you know, the Buddhist analogy and numbers that are too big to fathom. Yeah. So at the sentient levels, we're not only all this energy of discriminations, but we are discriminating amongst discriminations, and so on and so forth. It's logarithmic. It's so huge that the human life, samsara, can be, in and of itself, too much to catalog or understand, and therefore we remain trapped in that cataloging. And we concern ourselves with cataloging more. Oh, did I lose that part of the database? Am I losing something? Am I gaining something? And we mistake the process for something that we ourselves own. We misunderstand that we are a result of it, momentum moving through time-space, as well as everything that we're busy cataloging, discriminating, that we don't own anything. By investing so much of our identity into everything, what we actually do is bind ourselves to it, so that really the situation is that our database owns us. It becomes our identity. And what Shakyamuni is actually saying is, this is why you suffer. You make up your own suffering. Because all of your anxieties and your stress is about the data, when you don't understand that you too are the data, And if you just back off for a moment and look at the entire picture, you'll understand that you already are everything, and everything is you. You're all the same process. And that is so amazing, you can't even conceive of the whole thing. But it's a different position of mind. You're still here amongst the process of all the stuff, but the entire database, you're not just a point in the database. You're also a point outside the database, because you can perceive database-ness, suchness. You don't have to know every data point. It's not important. What's important is the process which creates it. That mind stands outside of that roiling karmic momentum. And this is why in the Lankavatara, we're kind of stuck. Because that ninth consciousness I keep talking about, that Buddha consciousness, that's that outside the database understanding. But with the eighth consciousness is the database. It is the entire karmic substance of the process. But if you could just stand outside that process and behold it as life, suddenly you don't have to be anxious about gaining or losing. That's just a database. Mahamati is struggling mightily with this, as he should. But I remind you again, this is a story. This is Shakyamuni teaching that this is a very difficult thing to understand. And Mahamati isn't a man or a woman. Mahamati is a personage, a stand-in, a straw man, if you will, who stands for the difficulty of inculcating this understanding. And he's giving Shakyamuni, the emancipated one, the opportunity to come at this problem from every angle he can conceive of, that people might get that little, oh, I get it. Aha, oh, I think I get it. You and I, we practice Lotus Sutra Buddhism. We know this. But at the time of the Lankavatara, there was still very much struggle. And you and I may struggle with it from time to time. It's a difficult thing to really get it. Thank you for being here. Thank you for working on that. Thank you for being students. Thank you for your practice. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. You are amazing. Keep your eye on the prize. Keep your practice strong. Welcome. Thank you for supporting this channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Patrons, if you're able to become a patron, every single little dollar donation that we get, whether it's a one-time donation or a month-to-month donation, goes right into this channel, so we can grow our Sangha, so we can influence more people, or actually get them just a resource to practice. That's what we're doing, right? Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Thank you. And with all that said, let's get into this difficulty of understanding. At that time, Mahamati, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, requested of the emancipated one, saying, hey, please tell me, Sugata, regarding what characterizes wrong discrimination. Tell me how, what, why, and who of wrong discrimination, which, when rising and going on, constitutes what is known as wrong discrimination. That is to say, what kind of thought is the term wrong discrimination applicable to? Or what kind of discrimination is to be called wrong? He's still reckoning with, but we're discriminating beings. And Shakyamuni keeps trying to explain to him, yes, but that's the problem. You don't have to annihilate the discriminating being. That's samsara. You need to mentally stand outside of that. It's not that there are particular discriminations that are wrong or right. It's that the discrimination energy is the magical thinking that's got you totally enraptured in ego and identification. Get out of there. You just can't get it, right? So let's see how Shakyamuni responds. Well said, Mahamati, and again, well said indeed, Mahamati. You who have been admitted into the order of bodhisattvas, Mahamati, think of this matter which is worth asking about for the welfare of many people. You're hitting the nail on the head, Mahamati. You're asking the right question, but now, for the happiness of many people, because of your compassion for the world, for the benefit of the multitudes, for the welfare and happiness of celestial beings and humankind. Therefore, Mahamati, listen well and reflect well within yourself as I tell you. Then the emancipated one spoke thus. When the multitudinous of objects is wrongly imagined as real and attached to, discrimination goes on evolving. This is exactly what I prefaced this talk with. The very fields, the Higgs field, the quantum fields, the electron fields, the quark fields, when they begin to interact, when they actually manifest, right? Because that too is karma. When a quark manifests in and out and becomes, that is a formation, that is a form, that is namarupa, that is the beginning of discrimination. There's no consciousness, there's no mind there. This is just the process that on a large scale we call life. When that starts, when discrimination begins, this, not that, it's just like an explosion of events. It just goes. It evolves, as he says here. And Mahamati, as people are attached tenaciously to the notion of grasping, because it's it's not just this, not that. It's that's mine, this is mine, that is not. This selection of identification, the ego begins to build as they have not ascertained in their minds as to the nature of the objective world, which is no more than the mind itself. In other words, you're observing this stuff. Why won't you just accept that you're an observer? Why is it that as you're observing this process of thingifying, of manifest energy, why do you choose to identify yourself with it instead of understanding that you're observing the process already? You already know. You're already cognizant of suchnesses. Why own? Why do you insist on possessing? Why do you not rely more or completely on what you're doing naturally is observing? Be the witness. Don't be another thing. Do you follow? As they have fallen into the dualistic view of being and non-being in Mahamadi, as they are nourished by the habit energy of the views and discriminations of the philosophers, they perceive the multitudinous of the external objects as real and become attached to them. And for this reason, a system of mentation, mind and what belongs to it, is discriminated and is spoken of as real, and with the assertion of an ego soul and its belongings, the system goes on functioning. Do you see that this is exactly what I've been describing from a scientific language point of view? This constant amassing of things to try to justify, identify, and conceptualize the self. That's the thinking of religions and philosophers that makes this body all about life. This body is produced by life, but it is not life itself. It is a small part, an instantiation of the process that is life. And if you can shift your mind away from I am this, that is that positioning, that identification, and rather see the self and all the selves as a process, suchness, there comes a release that washes through your entire existence, because you understand that we're not a static thing, that we're not an ego, we're not a bag, we're not a soul of conditions and tendencies like the chair and the house and the tree. That our mind isn't one of those things, that our mind is an observer. Our mind can perceive the true nature of how all of this is manifested from tendencies and potential without having to own it, possess, identify with it. Or maybe this will help. What we identify as or with is the all-seeing, all-knowing observer of the universe, of the process from which the universe is instantiated. Just like a flower, a blade of grass, our neighbor, our pets, ourselves, all manifested from tendencies and potential conditions moving in momentum. Not static things, but existing moment to moment manifestations. Not real in the sense that they are static, made, permanent, because that's what we do as we're building our database. Once you put a data point in a database, that's what that data point is. Never shall it be different. That's the illusion. It's like running your hand through water and believing that every atom and molecule of water that you've touched, you now own. It's gone already. You're just witnessing the process. Namum Myoho Renge Kyo. Everything's the same, but your mind has changed. Your mind is no longer attached to the ego, the construct of the self. Rather, it becomes the grand observer of all suchnesses, even the suchness of self. Well, of course, just lost a bunch of frames. Sorry. So, Mahamati, hearing this, as you say, emancipated one, when the multitudinous of external objects is wrongly imagined as real, right, static, owned, and attached to by people, discrimination goes on evolving. And they fall into the dualistic view of being and non-being. They nourish the views and discriminations of the philosophers, which are based on a notion of grasped and grasping, owning, reaching for more, right? Avarice. And as they perceive the multitudinousness of external objects as real, static things, and become attached to them, a system of mentation, mind and what belongs to it, is discriminated and is spoken of as real and goes on functioning owing to the fact that the external world is not recognized as nothing but the mind itself. Again, this is about the mind's ownership of things rather than viewing of things, observing, and that the multitudinous of things is tenaciously clung to as subject to the notion of being and non-being. Because this exists because it is mine. You see that clinging, that multitudinousness, not perceiving the moment-to-moment instantiation. This being the case, emancipated one, the multitudinous of external objects, which is characterized with the dualism of being and not being, is said to be neither existent nor non-existent, and does not render itself to the formation of the philosophical views. Okay, Mahamati is doing a lot of recitation of what he's just learned, right? But does he get it? Inasmuch as the external world owes its existence to discrimination. Now, again, we're talking about the mind. These discriminations are what create our grasping and ownership of things. It in itself must be said to be devoid of all forms of dualism. Emancipated one. In the same way, the highest reality is declared to be devoid of all forms of logical analysis, such as the means of proof, the sense perception, the syllogistic arguments, illustration, reasoning, etc. Because these are all facilities of a discriminating mind, yeah? How is it, then, emancipated one, that while, on the one hand, the discrimination of multiplicity is said to go on operating on the strength of the attachment which attaches itself to the multiplicity of external unrealities, the attachment, on the other hand, to the highest reality does not give rise to discrimination, which goes on functioning in its own way? How can you do both? Is it not, emancipated one, unfair reasoning on your part to say it gives rise to discrimination in one place and to say in another place it does not? Oh man, he's struggling, huh? According to the emancipated one, depending on and attaching to the dualism of being and non-being, there evolve views characteristic of wrong discrimination, as when the magician produces varieties of people that are not at all real and complete objects. Thus, signs of existence and non-existence are falsely imagined and go on so imagined. But in fact, existence itself is devoid of discrimination. If so, how does one come to cherish the dualism as held by a man of the world? And what Mahamati is identifying here is this levels of consciousness problem of the alaya. How can you at one time be in the database with all of its discrimination and tendencies and yet stand outside of it? How is that possible? How can both be true? So Shakyamuni responds, Mahamadi, discrimination indeed does not evolve, nor is it put away. You just said it evolves. But what he's saying is the process of discrimination is just the process. It's maintained. It's just doing what it does. It evolves in your cognizant mind of identification, where you discriminate on discrimination on discrimination on discrimination, constantly owning, trying to own the static reality of things, building your very identity on those discriminations. But if you stand outside of that in your mind, you can witness that whole play without being affected. Why? Because there is no evolving of discrimination as regards being and not being. This is where he's locating it in the mind. That activity is happening, but your mentation, your mind of observation, doesn't have to be swallowed up by it. Because the perception of objective realities is not real, because all that is seen is to be recognized as nothing but the mind itself. This is your observation of the process. Like my analogy roughly about being in the rapids in a canoe and bounced around and turning over and hitting your head on a rock, or standing outside the rapids watching that activity. It's a very different perspective on the same thing. Mahamadi, discrimination does not evolve, nor is it put away. But Mahamadi, for the sake of the ignorant, who are addicted to discriminating and the multiplicity of things which are of their own mind, it is said by me that discrimination, whose first function is to produce effects, takes its rise owing to the attachment to the aspect of multiplicity as characteristic of objects. Blah, 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 word salad again. But what he's identifying, as well as can be said in this translation, is that the ignorant are the people living in samsara, in the alaya consciousness. They aren't even aware of the alaya. They're living in the database. And because they're in the database, they can't see outside of it. They're ignorant of the fact that they can, with their mind, in a moment, choose to stand outside of the database because they're naturally built observers. They're just not using that facility yet. They haven't taught themselves how to stand outside the database. How otherwise, Mahamadi, can the ignorant and simple-minded have an insight into the mind itself, which they discriminate and see themselves freed from the notion of an ego and what belongs to it, that identification? They're so deeply entrenched, as humans are, in their identity as being a referential, right, defined amongst discrimination, the self, the ego. To let all that go is not easy. It's difficult to penetrate the mind's ability to let all of that go, although it can happen in an instant. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. But if you don't know what it is you're liberating yourself from, or what it looks like to be emancipated from the database, very difficult to understand, to envision, to discriminate. and see themselves freed from the notion of an ego and what belongs to it, and also freed from the wrong conception of cause and effect. And again, how can they realize or recognize that there is nothing but mind itself, and cause a revulsion at the inmost seat of consciousness? A revulsion meaning when you realize that you've been in the database and you can observe the activities of the database from outside of it. That's what revulsion means. It is putting this database in its proper place as a function of life. Not life itself, but a function of it. That perspective is very renewing. It's very, talk about an aha moment, an epiphany, yeah? How can they have a clear perception of all the stages and attain the inner realization of Tathagatas, which transcends the 5 dharmas, the 3 Shrivabhavas, and the idea of reality as well as discrimination? For this reason, Mahamati, I state that discrimination takes its rise from our attachment to the multiplicity of objects, which are not real, and that emancipation comes from our thoroughly understanding the meaning of reality as it is, and also the meaning of multiplicity of things which evolve from discrimination. Again, that can sound like word salad, but he's trying to be very accurate here and define the difference between the mind in the database, discriminating, creating a version of self, of identity, and a far more true identity that is egoless, but an observer, a witness to this entirety of process. That witnessing, that observation is not culled from or created by that process. It is a mental facility that allows us to stand outside the database as it is going on. This is how we can be in 2 places at once, essentially. Embroiled in the database or observing the magnificent timelessness of the process. So it is said, those who, regarding the world as evolving from causes and conditions, are attached to these notions, as well as to the fourfold proposition, fail to understand my teaching. The world cannot be predicated anywhere as being or as non-being, because it's a moment-to-moment instantiation. Bert, here gone, here gone, here gone. You can't say it exists, because now you're permanentizing. The world cannot be predicated anywhere as being or non-being, or as being and non-being, as is discriminated by the ignorant who regard it as subject to causes and conditions. When the world is seen to be unpredicable, with such notions as being and non-being, or being and non-being, a change takes place in the mind, and egolessness is attained. Exactly what I've been trying to say in my own words, yes? All things are unborn because they are born of causation. Anything that is born of causation is an effect. It's just a manifestation of potential. It's just energy in different forms, moment to moment. And from an effect, nothing is produced. An effect doesn't make causes, it just instantiates. Yeah? I used to have the hardest time with young people getting mad at somebody else and going, well, I'm going to be his effect. I'm going to go over there and beat his ass. And I'd have to go, you're not an effect maker. We are not effect makers. We are karmic We instantiate energies and manipulate and influence energies, and we are that influenced and created energy. The effect just gonna happen. You are not in control of the effect. You are only in control of the karma. From an effect, no effect is produced. If you assert this, you commit the fault of a double effect, and this double effect being unattainable, no existence comes from an effect. When the samskrita, anything produced, is regarded as free from the dualism dependent and depending, there decidedly is mind only. That's just in your mind. And hence my teaching of mind only. That's where your focus needs to be. How is your mind perceiving, experiencing what is happening? The mind as norm is the abode of self-nature, which has nothing to do with a world of causation. Of this norm, which is perfect existence and the highest Brahma, I speak. An ego soul is a truth belonging to thought construction, in which there is no real reality. The self-nature of the skandhas is also a thought construction, as there is no reality in it. And we talked about that earlier, the skandhas being this mechanism to fill the database. The sameness of the four kinds, individual forms, cause the coming into being, and the sameness of non-ego is the fourth. These are subjects of discipline for yogins, for mentators, or practitioners, I suppose. There is a state which, removed from all philosophical views, free from imagined and imagining, of no attainment and of no birth, this I call mind norm. This is an allusion to the ninth consciousness, although it isn't defined yet in the Lankavatara. It's defined as somehow within the database, but you can understand why there's still confusion, yes? Of neither existence nor non-existence do I speak, but of mind only, which has nothing to do with existence and non-existence, and which is thus free from intellection. Suchness, tatata, emptiness, realm of truth, the various forms of the will body, these I call mind only. That perception of suchness, that is the mind, that is the Buddha mind at work. The perception of suchnesses. Not identification. Not identifying suchnesses. But understanding at the core the process of suchnessing. Words. Multiplicity of objects evolves from the conjunction of habit, energy, and discrimination. Again, habit energy is our reliance on stacking up data points. Yeah? It is born of mind, but is regarded by people as existing outwardly. Because I perceive this, then that is that. But that's a construction of your mind. This I call mind only. The external world is not, and multiplicity of objects is what is seen of mind, body, property, and abode. These I call mind only. All right. So we end that section with Shakyamuni's best clinical description of a mind of awareness versus a mind of cataloging. Still, we are catalogers, aren't we? We are data amassers. But certainly by now, you're getting the clue that there is that self, but there is an experience of self once removed, an experience of selfness that can be observed without being embroiled in. Yeah? This is the entanglements that he talks about. I hope there was something in this talk that gave you cause for chanting, at least. But also, I want you to deeply appreciate the nature of our practice. That we can, in just a few moments, by chanting Namo Myoho Renge Kyo, especially with our perfect mirror of that ninth consciousness, that understanding of and experience of the whole as a construction and a magnificent process that we do not own, nor are we owned by, but in the fantastic position to observe, to experience that observation. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Thank you for your practice. Thank you for your donations. Thank you for liking and subscribing to this channel. You guys are awesome. I can't describe my appreciation and awe for this practice and for your doing it. So thank you for inspiring me. And on that note, I will let you go for now, and I'll see you in the next one, all right? Be there. Sometimes I think it's a TV show, this life. Thank you for being there, and bye-bye for now.